Hey, where did my salary go? Towards taxes, aka the legal robbery of hardworking, productive people. And they've conjured up quite a nice little list to take your money away from you. Income tax. The tax that you pay for actually being a hardworking, contributing member to society. National insurance tax, council tax, capital gains tax, inheritance tax, value added tax. The tax that you pay 20 times a day and you still don't realize it. And stamp duty. And the final most important tax that they've managed to conjure up is, of course, breathing tax. Now, that last one was obviously a joke, but hopefully it remains a joke. But then this begs the question, how much of your hard-earned money goes towards taxes? And we're going to find out right now. So, how much is really taken? Well, according to the Office of National Statistics, the average UK household pays approximately 19% of its gross income towards taxes. So we have income tax, national insurance, and council tax. And then when you add VAT, fuel duty, and various other indirect taxes, what actually happens is a third of your salary vanishes. Put differently, for every £3 you earn, one is taken away from you. So, why are we all okay with this? After all, theft is illegal. When the government does it, of course, it's fine. Most of these taxes, in fact, are older than our grandparents, and yet they still apply to our lives today. Just imagine how much the world has changed in the last 80 years, and yet taxes don't reflect that. Let's have a look at stamp duty, right? Everyone knows about it, but few know when it was actually implemented. I'll give you a few seconds now for you to answer the quiz. Was it implemented in 1982, B, 1894, C, 1971, or D, 1694? Pause the video now and answer. Okay, the correct answer is D. This is the same tax. In fact, it was the Stamp Act at the time that was implemented in 1765 that caused the American Revolution. And also, the stamp duty in and of itself is 95 years older than France, than modern France, because this was 95 years before the French Revolution. Now, why was this tax actually implemented? Well, it was a temporary tax meant to be for just 4 years to help pay off the war against France. But obviously, when you have free money coming in, and easy money at that, well, the government's not going to stop it, right? And as we can see, it was so successful that they kept it to this day. And a quick disclaimer, the modern stamp duty was modified and implemented in 2003. But what do I actually want you to learn from this? I want you to know that first, taxes are outdated, as I've written here. But secondly, all taxes start as temporary and yet become permanent. I'll give you some more examples now in case you're not convinced. So, income tax, the tax that everybody hates and yet everybody pays. When did that start in the UK? As I've written here, in 1799. Now, what was its purpose? To fund the war against Napoleon. I don't know about you, but last time I checked, Napoleon's been dead for about 200 years. So, I don't understand why we have to continue paying this. And you might say, well, this is only in the UK. No. Of course, when something is so successful in one country, it has to be replicated elsewhere. In the United States, for example, it was first introduced in the American Civil War to help fund the war, and then subsequently it was scrapped. Okay, they stuck to their promise. And then what happened? In 1913, it was reintroduced, and this would be used to fund World War One. Now, last time I checked, World War One ended in 1918, and World War Two ended in 1945. So why are Americans still paying income tax? Well, because it's free money for the government. And you might say, okay, this is just one tax. But they don't do it just with taxes. They do it with tolls too. For example, the Dartford Tunnel in London was a project that cost £136 million. And the government initially introduced tolls so that they could recoup the 136 million, and then it would be free from then on. Makes sense? Logical, right? But what happened? In 1999, the government said that they'll be scrapping the tolls by the end of 2003. Everyone's happy with that, right? And then in 2001, the government backtracked and said, actually, we're not going to do that. Which essentially is the government lying. But did it have any consequences, any repercussions? No, of course not. And on the topic of taxes and what they're planning to introduce, Andy Burnham is planning to introduce a new social care tax. So now I'm going to discuss what is the purpose of the news and what does this mean for us. So, as I already mentioned, Andy Burnham wants to implement a social tax. This is spreading like wildfire on the news. And then this begs the question, why is it spreading like wildfire on the news? Well, in military terms, this is what's known as a probing attack. A probing attack is where you test the enemy's strength. So what this is actually doing is this is testing the population's complicity and the docility of the population to see, are they complicit? Will this go through? Because if they have insane backlash, they'll definitely claw back on the plan and they won't implement the tax. But unfortunately, in the UK, the population as a whole is extremely docile. And given the fact that the government is bankrupt and has been bankrupt for basically 25 years, they will most likely do everything in their power to implement this tax. And as I've written here, the fact that it's on the news means that it's more likely for it to happen. Why? Because the purpose of the news is not to report the truth. No. It's to prepare you for what's about to happen, as I've written here. We have some recent examples. For example, the US-Iran conflict. Prior to the conflict, probably for about a week straight, all of the news channels were floating the idea every single day, aggressively. Why? To prepare you for what's about to come, to get you used to the idea so that it's not so crazy when it actually takes place. Because if you were to wake up and then the next day there was a war, well, naturally that would invoke a nationwide protest in America for sure. Even though there were protests in America, it was not the same scale as if they had not subdued the people. As I've written here, if these things were sudden, there would be a revolution. Take the 2020 pandemic, for example. They were floating around the idea that, you have to be locked at home. And then people, when they got locked at home, they were okay with it. In fact, most people got paid to basically stay at home. They managed to get 80% to 100% of their salaries paid. And naturally, this inflated the government debt. But most people, not only do they not know this, but even if they know this, they don't understand how catastrophic that truly is. But imagine the 2020 pandemic. Imagine getting locked up in your home, you wake up one day and you're told by the government that you cannot leave your home under any circumstances. Well, there'll be a nationwide revolution. There would literally be a revolution that same day. But because they subdue you to the idea, it's not so bad. And that is the true purpose of the news. And on the topic of taxes and how this actually relates to taxes, the fact that they're planning to implement a new tax just shows you how incompetent they are and how stupid this all is. Because, as I already mentioned, the government runs a deficit, and it has run a deficit for the past 25 years. And it hasn't had more than 5 surplus years since 1971. So then this begs the question, how does the government pay for the things it needs to pay since it has a deficit? Well, it's quite simple, really. They create new money to finance the deficit. What do? Officially, they issue bonds, but then the central bank, through quantitative easing, finances them. And if you watched my prior classes, you'll know that QE is basically just printing money, but electronically. And what happens because of this? We get inflation. And inflation is, and we never get taught this, but this is a hidden tax on the poor. Now, why is it only a tax on the poor? Well, because if you're rich, you own assets. And because of inflation, assets actually rise in price. So for example, stocks, gold, real estate, although stocks not always. And this is good if you own the assets, as I already mentioned, because their price will increase. But if you don't have assets, what's actually happened is you've just become poorer. And on top of that, the government taxes you to cover your services, but every pound that you earn is worth less and less and less. And what the government will inevitably do is they'll raise taxes to try and compensate, which makes you even poorer, because then they'll print even more money to finance the deficit. And this is like a never-ending doom loop until inevitably the system collapses. So then this begs the question, what's the point of paying taxes if the government just prints money to cover the deficit? Well, now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the official reason for taxes. So, taxes exist for four main reasons. The first one, to fund public services. So public services don't actually make money, right? So doctors, policemen, firefighters, they don't make money for the country. But obviously what they do is invaluable work to help the community and help the people of the country as a whole. And as markets would not finance this, that's one of the reasons as to why we have to have taxes to pay for this service. Next, education and infrastructure. So needless to say, without taxes, we would have less education and less infrastructure. And it's very important that education is accessible, because when the population is well educated, the country can thrive and can continue to improve, making it more competitive on the global scale. The third reason is to control inflation, as implementing taxes means that your spending power is reduced as some of your income is given back to the government, hence why inflation is reduced. And fourthly, to reduce inequality, as the money from the taxes can then be given to lower income areas where it can then be used to provide more opportunities to younger people, and it can be used for things such as social housing, basically allowing a deprived area to rise. However, all four of these are flawed arguments. Let me break them down. So the first one, to fund public services. Why is this a bad argument? Well, we can clearly see that this no longer works. NHS waiting times are higher than they've ever been, and the standard and the quality of the services is decreasing to the point where you even wonder if the service even exists. And to tackle the second argument now, education and infrastructure. The quality of the education has decreased drastically. And in terms of infrastructure, well, even though we pay taxes to improve our infrastructure and to uphold it, we can clearly see that it's not what it used to be. If you go on any road, you'll be like, when was the last time this road was paved? As most of them have cracks, and yet you pay road tax, and you wonder when was the last time the roads were actually maintained. And in regards to education, in my case, and in pretty much every single person that I know's case, is that you basically don't learn anything in school. Essentially, you're self-taught. If you have the textbooks, you learn everything that you need through them, whereas in school, you basically learn nothing. It's just a waste of 6 hours every single day. And the craziest thing about this all is that 10% of the government's taxes goes into education. So the fact that myself and many others, in fact hundreds of thousands of people, say that they basically learn nothing in school shows that this is a systemic failure. Third thing, to control inflation. In fact, I don't even know how I managed to keep a straight face presenting the supporting argument, but this is utter nonsense. Because, as I mentioned before, they literally cause inflation. They print the money, basically. This is an oversimplified version. They print the money, which in turn causes inflation. Because inflation, if you've watched my prior classes, you'll know that it's actually the increase in the amount of money in the money supply. And this is what actually leads to inflation. It just means there's more money, therefore the value of the money is worth less. Not the official current definition of inflation, which is the rate of change of prices over time. Because this could be due to a myriad of reasons, not just because of printing money. And fourthly, to reduce inequality. Unfortunately, we have seen that the inequality is simply rising as 1%, the top 1% in the UK owns 10% of all of the UK's wealth, which is the same as the whole of the bottom 50% of the UK. So the top 1% is equal to basically half of the nation. If that does not scream inequality, I don't know what does. So now let me present you the solution to all of this, so that you know what actually needs to take place. Before I tell you the solution, I want to give you a massive round of applause for getting this far in the video, as you now know what the 90% don't. So onwards with the video now. The solution is Georgism. This is an economic system that's called too communist by the capitalists and too capitalist by the communists. So what does it actually say? So, as we all know, income tax, sales tax, and capital improvement taxes actually punish productivity. As what is income tax? Income tax is where you're productive, you've helped society, and yet the government comes along and takes 20% of your paycheck. So what's actually happened? 20% of your day has been spent working for free. So what does Georgism propose? So people should privately own their own wealth. The wealth that they've created should be privately owned, but economic rent from the land and resources should belong equally to all members of society. And the only tax that we should have is a land value tax. And the advantage of this is that there can be no tax evasion, so everyone pays what they need to, and subsequently the government has a set budget that it knows that will actually come in each time. And due to the fact that there won't be tax evasion, the government will actually have the necessary money to fulfill all of its duties. And I'll give you an example, right? So imagine we have this mansion, this massive house, where it's in a desert. And then we have this mansion, this massive house, something like Buckingham Palace, right, in central London. So which one is more valuable, Buckingham Palace or the mansion in the desert? Well, obviously Buckingham Palace. Why is that? Well, Buckingham Palace is in a prime time central location. It has loads of people, loads of shops, loads of fitness centers, loads of roads, connectivity. And it's its location and the resources around it, primarily in the form of services. So you have shops, you have banks, you have transportation links. They provide it with its value. But this value is thanks to the society around it. Whereas the mansion in the desert has nothing. It doesn't have shops, doesn't have any banks, no transportation links, no people, and hence why it's worth a lot less. So as we can see from this example, it's actually the community that gives this house its value as opposed to the house itself. So another brilliant advantage of Georgism is the fact that it disincentivizes speculating and holding. And this in turn makes the land cheaper and subsequently makes housing affordable again. This is the solution to getting affordable housing again. Will this ever be implemented? Likely not, because all the people in Parliament actually benefit from the current scheme. They actually make money from this. But naturally, if the people's will is heard, then this system will actually solve our issues in terms of housing. And another brilliant thing about the system is that the excess money is proposed to be given to the citizens. As what we have right now, even when the government has a surplus, obviously there's corruption. As much as people like to lie and say that the UK is not corrupt, the corruption in every country is obscene. But for some reason, England, the United Kingdom and America, and all the Western countries seem to have some mirage of no corruption. But the truth is, the corruption takes place in Congress, in Parliament, in all these government institutions, where it's not so obvious to the public eye. So by giving the excess back, and by having a tight budget, you'll actually know how corrupt your government is. And naturally, if you have your money given back to you, if it's not actually needed, this will allow the country to be extremely efficient. And obviously, every business strives to be as efficient as possible. So this basically means that you're running your country like a business, which is the best possible way to run your country. And now I must present a common critique. The common critique is that it's very hard for us to value how much each plot of land is worth. But a very famous economist called Fred Harrison, a man who predicted both the 1990 crash and the 2008 crash, in fact being one of the earliest to predict the 2008 crash, has outlined frameworks as to how it should be calculated. So if we want to, we really can implement this system to improve all of our lives. Now the question is, will we do it? And now that we truly understand the history of taxes, we've broken it down fully, and we understand what we must do, in the next class I'm going to teach you how taxes are at the moment and what you need to know about them so that you can benefit as much as possible from that. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know down in the comment section below. Thank you for watching this. I hope you got some real value out of it. And subscribe to stay tuned for more videos like this that will help improve your financial literacy and your future.